break time down into certain biblical settings. So if you don't mind, would you care to stand with us this morning, and we will look to the Lord in prayer. Gracious Lord, we're thankful for this day of life. And above all, Lord, you've seen fit to call us to be your children in an hour when the world is groped in spiritual darkness. Wickedness is running rampant, and mortal man seems to have lost his way. And we're thankful that, God, you give us an opportunity to come together. And, Lord, we look to you that you will take your book and let the words that's contained therein All right, you may be seated. We want to title this, Putting the Picture Together. Naturally, the words up there is the last 100 years. But remember, a lot of our Bible prophecies are proven to be applicable for the last 100 years. They've not just been strung out through several hundred years, and all be the end time. This causes your critics today that are from the intellectual realm of society to say us Christians are absolutely crazy. We're fanatical. And in the religious world we live in, you've got a lot of educated doctors of divinity. They presume to know Hebrew and Greek inside and out. They've studied all the theories of a religion. And they make it appear that they're greatly wise men. But I think through this study of these subjects we're going to be dealing with in the few coming mornings, I believe the book of Matthew, especially in the 24th and 25th chapter, is going to give us an altogether different picture. We know down through the religious era of time, very little have I ever heard preachers of the denominational realm ever refer to the parables, what they mean, or anything. In fact, most of your religious systems have no knowledge of what 7 church ages is or what it pertains to or anything. So this morning, we're going to start out, and we're in the book of Matthew. I'd like for us to turn with me to the beginning of the 24th chapter. Jesus and the disciples have been in the temple area. And it says that he went out of the temple, and as he got onto the outside, meaning out of the, he was not in the building, he was in the court. A lot of people think, well, you go into the building. You do not go into the building. Only the priests went in there. The people went into the outer court around the building, and they worshiped from that position because that area covered 31 acres. And imagine hundreds and thousands of Jews coming from all over the land at different occasions. So as they were departing out of the temple, really the temple compound, the Jews, being disciples at that hour, they began to elaborate to Jesus, look at the beauty of this building. It was a beautiful building. King Herod had beautified it, glorified it. He spent elaborate sums of money to decorate it and get it ready for, he did it for political gain. And so as they began to ask him questions and point to the beauty, I'm going to read here in the 2nd verse. And Jesus said unto them, see ye not all these things? He's looking at the building when he points. There shall not be left here one stone upon another that shall not be thrown down. Now from that place they leave, and they go over on the Mount of Olives. And along on the slopes of Mount of Olives, as you begin to gain the top, there is an area that was used as an old stopping point. And it was sort of just an offset into the bank like here. And as people come to Mount of Olives going south or east, they would sit there and rest a while. So evidently, that's where Jesus has come with the disciples, and he sits down. So then it says down here, and as he sat upon the Mount of Olives, the disciples came unto him privately, saying, Tell us, when shall these things be? Meaning all these stones. And what shall be the sign of thy coming and of the end of the world? 3 points, 3 questions. And Jesus answered and said unto them, Take heed that no man deceive you. Now at this point of my reading, I want to remind us all. Yes, if we read Matthew 24 just verbatim, we think this covers the whole history of the grace age. It does not. We're looking at words, but there are certain words that fall in a certain place that breaks the thought. Take heed that no man deceive you. For many shall come in my name, saying, I am Christ, and shall deceive many. And ye shall hear wars and rumors of wars. See that ye be not troubled. For all these things must come to pass. Notice, but the end, meaning the end of the world, is not yet. Now let us take that and back up here. He has given the disciples at that hour a warning. Take heed that no man deceive you. When we go into those first 300 of church history, it all starts here in the first age of Christendom. Down the road of life here came man after man with a revelation of his own. The Ante-Nicene Fathers give you descriptions of them, what they taught. The Apostle Paul deals with them in his epistles. Every time he would turn around somewhere, here comes somebody into one of his churches and teaches something completely contrary to what Paul taught. So my point is this. In those first 200 or 300 years, yes, it fell the responsibility for Christendom to beware of false teachers, false Christs, and false prophets. But now notice, when he said, you shall hear of wars and rumors of war, that's been going on through the ages of time. But the end is not yet. But now notice when we come to verse 7. For nation shall rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom. And there shall be famines and pestilence, and earthquakes in divers places. All these are the beginnings of sorrows. That's not pointing in the Middle Ages. That's pointing right down here to the end time. I've got the history of the last 150 years. The last 150 years has recorded more political war upheavals than all the rest of that area put together. Oh, we can have history, the 100 years of war. But how many other nations the world over did it affect? My point is this. When he said all these are the beginnings of sorrows, he's pointing to the end time. Because once that shaking condition starts, this is God's way of allowing unregenerate man begin to shape the world politically and socially for the end time. If you go back to just at the dawn of the 20th century, Russia was in a shaking condition. She enters the Bolshevik Revolution, the end of the czars. Communism begins to make its inroads. She's reaching out and taking in new territories. But then look in Europe. England and France have made a fast advance in the Middle East.
And all of that leads up to World War I, the first time the world has ever really been brought to a world war. It was that hour of time, brothers and sisters, that began to affect the European nations for the time of the end, and yet the world don't even realize it. This was the beginning of times of sorrow, depression. I've got a book at home that tells in the 15th century there is recorded only 100 and some odd earthquakes throughout the entire world. By the time we come to 1800, there's better than 2,000. So doesn't that not speak for itself? As we get closer to this last 100 years, these things that was forecast began to grow in numbers. And for the last 100 years, it's earthquake of such a devastating nature. Storms, tidal waves, volcanoes, pestilence. Look in Africa. The starvation is going on. Now then, brothers and sisters, I want to bring in a point. We've got an element of charismatic preachers today. They pretend to be so smart, intelligent. Hal Lindsey is one of them. He tries to prove to the charismatic church world there's no such a thing as a secret rapture. Now, last night we had 60-some hook-ons. So if there's any of that kind of people out there listening this morning, I want you to know, I'm not Hal Lindsey, and I'm not going to try to walk in his shoes. He's an intellectual fellow. We're going to have his readings in a moment. But Brother Mims last night brought out a point. And I put it together like this. We're going to see throughout these series of meetings, at various times in certain individuals' lifetime, they were people that God dealt with specifically to show them, you are the part of a generation or a society that's going to see a certain biblical event take place in your lifespan. When Jesus then, as he goes farther on here, and he tells the disciples, who were the Jews of that hour, he was not pointing down to you and me, he was talking to the disciples then. When you see the abomination that maketh desolate, standing in the holy place. Many people think that abomination of desolation is some kind of an object standing there. It is not. It's an environment created by Satan through political motivations. Because the two words put together means a time of excessive hatred, to deprive of inhabitants, or to lay waste, or to destroy. So when you put it together, when you see something coming in and against Jerusalem, and the political game is destroy the people, tear down their holy spot, run them out of this city, deny them to even have possession of it, then whosoever readeth, let him understand. Now that Daniel was the man that prophesied this. And his brother Govinder brought out the other night. Where was Daniel at? He was in Babylon. Let's take a look at Daniel before we bring it on in here to this. We know this in the 8th and 9th chapter, how Daniel is a man that is seeking after the perfect will of God. When the angel came to Daniel and said, "O man, well beloved," he has found favor with God and so forth. He has come to tell him and show him the things. And I'm saying this morning, brothers and sisters. The church world in general will say, well, no man knows the day or the hour. We're not here to talk about the day or the hour this morning. We're here to talk about the fact there's a generation of people today that God's dealing specifically with them, and this book is going to come alive to them. It will never come alive to the church world, but it will come alive to the bride of Christ. It's promised to be that way. But in order for this to be brought about in the way I want to bring it out, let's go back and take a look at Daniel. I had an email question coming to me yesterday. Wanted to know, Brother Jackson, is the 144,000 Jews that preach the everlasting gospel? Are they going to be remaining in the mortal flesh to pass on over into the millennium when the Lord will repopulate the earth? It's not the 144,000 eunuchs. Now, brothers and sisters, let's go back. Turn back to the book of Daniel, the first chapter. In that first chapter, it tells you how that Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that was not their actual names. That was names that was given to them. Those men had been selected by a certain person. And it was the captain of the eunuchs. Now ask yourself the question, what's this guy got to do with picking young men of other races for servant duty in the king's palace? Why could it not be somebody else? But it says the captain of the eunuchs. Well, a eunuch is a man that's been rendered sterile. And according to ancient history, this all started with Nimrod and continued on right down that line. When we come into the book of Acts, and Philip was going east. When he was led out into the desert, who did he meet? A Jew from down in Arabia, Sheba. He was from the queen's palace, but he was a eunuch. Now let that sink in. And if the young people are on the line this morning, we're going to see what the record of the Jewish history says about Daniel. So I'm going to ask Bud, he's a good reader, so come, Brother Bud. This is the Jewish historian Flavius Josephus. So he continues on what the chapter of Daniel didn't continue. I want him to read it. And then we'll know why he never returned with the other Jews, but stayed in Babylon.
So now Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, took some of the most noble of the Jews that were children, and the kinsmen of Zedekiah, their king, such as were remarkable for the beauty of their bodies and the comeliness of their countenance, and delivered them into the hands of tutors, and to the improvement to be made by them. He also made some of them to be eunuchs, which course he took also with those of other nations whom he had taken in the flower of their age, and afforded them their diet from his own table, and had them instructed in the institutes of the country, and taught the learning of the Chaldeans. And they had now exercised themselves sufficiently in that wisdom which he had ordered they should apply themselves to. Now among these there were 4 of the families of Zedekiah of most excellent dispositions, one of whom was called Daniel, another was called Ananias, another Mishael, and the 4th Azarias. And the king of Babylon changed their names and commanded that they should make use of other names. Daniel he called Belteshazzar, Ananias Shadrach, Mishael Meshach, Azarias Abednego. These the king had in esteem and continued to love because of the very excellent temper they were of, and because of their application to learning and the progress they had made in wisdom.
Now with that reading, brothers and sisters, when we see how the angel of the Lord then came to Daniel, who had fasted and prayed because he had read in Jeremiah how that 70 years was determined upon the people in Jerusalem. It was this man that God gave the revelation of the duration and the ending of that period of time. Daniel was, in other words, Daniel was a spiritual man that was concerned about his people. But now, brothers and sisters, keep in mind, he was taken to Babylon as a young man. He's lived all through the reign of Nebuchadnezzar, Belshazzar, and Cambyses. And now then, we pick up his account in Daniel, about the 8th or 9th chapter. He's living under Darius and later Cyrus. Now the point is this. Why did he not go back? If he knew when the Jews was going to be liberated, why would he not want to go back? He goes ahead to Josephus tells there. Since in the Levitical law, it was forbidden for a eunuch to stand in the court of the righteous. No priest that was a eunuch could be a priest. Nobody that was a hunchback could be in the court of the righteous. No club-footed, no physically deformed man could stand. Did that mean they starved them to death? No, sirree. They were allowed, they were looked upon as part of the society. They was allowed to live and eat like anybody else. But God thought enough of his people that if the strangers came along to look into the court when they was worshiping him, he did not want these heathen people seeing any deformed thing among God's people as a reproach. Now take that as a type. God don't want people in the midst of you and me who want to love the Lord and serve him, and yet we've got our feet knee-deep in the things of the world, and the devil just absolutely dominates our lives. We are absolutely to stand out as a peculiar people, a royal priesthood. In our respect, he's not looking whether we've lost a hand or anything. But spiritually speaking, brothers and sisters, he does want some perfection, and he wants to have a people that really love him. I want to say this morning, serving God is not a drudgery thing. I love it. I wouldn't change it for nothing in the world. I haven't seen anything else I would trade this all for. So now let us get on here to the book of Matthew. I believe this book is going to talk to us. We have nothing to do in the Middle Ages. Jesus in the 13th chapter of Matthew give you and I 7 parables that describe the ages. Now keep in mind, the Apostle Paul never said one thing about 7 church ages. No other of the Jews except John, years later. So now then let us take this, brothers and sisters. When he says, for nations shall rise against nations, so on forth, so forth, he said, these are the beginnings of sorrows. Meaning, we're jumping the dark ages. Because in the dark ages when Catholicism ruled, you know and I know, false prophets, false teachers running the roads was not allowed. Yet Catholicism was a system of the whole rotten bunch. So therefore, little is said about the dark ages in that respect in this. But when we come to the end of time, when really the sorrows are to set in, he said, all of these are the beginnings of sorrows. Then, not back here, then shall they deliver you up. He's talking to the Jews. Shall they deliver you up to be afflicted, and shall kill you, and ye shall be hidden of all nations for my name's sake. Look what World War II brought. 6 million Jews from Poland, France, Italy, Austria, all over Europe, rounded up, burnt, skinned alive. It was the devil's business to erase that race of people from the face of the earth. Why? Because it's from that race the world has been able to get the Bible. This is not our book. We can say we printed it in a different language, but it's not our book. No one writer was a Gentile. But God, as He did allow the Jews to be broke off, He brought it to us to give you and me an opportunity for the gift of life. But good to show that, brothers and sisters, when this time would come, how that the dirty devil began to go to work on the Jews. And the world had to be brought into that period in order to get another element of the Jews ready to go back when the opportunity would be presented. Then shall they deliver you up to be afflicted, and shall kill you, and you shall be hated of all nations for my name's sake. That starts in World War II. And today, brothers and sisters, the world is crying out. UN, European, Commonwealth nations. They're closing down anti-Semitism. And the 83rd Psalm says that the whole world will be confederated against the Jewish nation, saying, let's cut her off, that she be not any longer. And verse 10 begins to broaden the picture. And then shall many be offended. Oh, ever since World War II, as we begin to see this apostate spirit settling in the world, look at the social picture of things. America today is the leading factor. A nation that once was looked upon by the world as a Christian nation. Now that we've got a society, brothers, so mixed up, a true Christian, brothers and sisters, feel like many times he's walking through a jungle of wild beasts. Especially if you get into a place of employment or learning or something. If they find out that you're really a Christian, you're signaled out. You're really ridiculed from the intellectual and the political spectrum of America. Don't mention the name Jesus in a public place. When 9/11 happened, brothers and sisters, they say America woke up. There's only a few in America woke up. Get back to the pledging of allegiance. One nation under God. Let's take God out of it. Because, brothers and sisters, for the last 40 years, the nation that claimed to be the leader of the world has absolutely made an image of themselves. And more they've come on with a philosophy. We want to show the world that we can take all races and put them together in one bucket and show the world how we can love one another. Look, I come from the country, and it's an actual fact. You cannot raise hogs and chickens in the same place. You cannot absolutely lay a baby and a rattlesnake in the same crib and say, now sleep together. Because the political world will be wanting to take your tax money and hire a bunch of philosophers and medical professors. Why did the baby die? I just use them as a figure of speech. So then shall many be offended. Why? When man has forgotten his Savior, he has lost hold of anything that can change his arrogant nature to something that's kind and peaceful and willing to be a friend of everybody. Now he becomes independent. Now he becomes selfish, arrogant. And he rides down the road, shooting at anybody. School kids. I never heard of it when I went to school. Carrying guns. Brothers and sisters. On and on the picture goes. He's describing to you and me a social picture of the end time as your whole political and socialistic trend is beginning to go into an upheaval. And when World War II was ended, I'll never forget it. One October morning in 1945, they blew the whistle. They let us out in a grassy knoll and we sat down. Second lieutenant had some sheets of paper. He says, well, boys, he says, I know we're all waiting for our turn to go home. But he says, this has just come in from the War Department. He says, we're going to establish now a charter called the United Nations. And the beginning of this and the purpose of it is that This war we've just fought is the ending of all wars. Well, I was not a Christian, but I've been brought up in Christian environment. And I sat there just a young fellow and I said, that's what you think. The Bible is the book that's right. And did you know since 1945, the sun has never risen and set on this globe, but what somewhere a human life isn't slaughtered because of some kind of political unrest. It's genocide in one place, political upheaval in another. From Korea to Vietnam to the Caribbean, everywhere, some kind of a war and a conflict. And now look what's going on. Right where the Bible was written, the world conflict is getting back home. Brothers and sisters, I have to say, we're living in that time of trouble. Now then, but then he says, but he that shall endure to the what? End. Now notice the word end. Up here in the 8th verse, when we have read the 7th, see what it starts like. He said, all these are the beginning of sorrows. Now we come down here, as that leads from one thing into another. But he that shall endure to the end. We have to realize, brothers and sisters, no one man can endure and exist for a long period of that nature. How many understand the point? But it does show that somewhere in all that process, there is going to be a generation of people. The last one will not have gone off of this earth till they have fulfilled the end. Now, the 14th verse. As I read it, I want us all to take a good look at ourselves. And this gospel of the kingdom shall be preached in all the world for a witness unto all nations, and then shall the end come. The charismatics are not preaching it. The Catholics are not preaching it. You and I are the only ones that's preaching it. Because you and I are the only ones that knows what truth is. That don't make us anything. It only just proves that we are children of God. Signaled out of all the mess. Given a little glimpse of an understanding where we're living in time. We can look back and see where things have come from. But we can look ahead and see where it's headed. And the end is just ahead, a short distance. Now then, the thought changes. Jesus now goes to the 15th verse. And he begins to look at them disciples then. And he's not talking to you and me. When ye therefore shall see the abomination of desolation, spoken of by Daniel, the prophet, stand in the holy place. He didn't say, whosoever fasteth, whosoever prayeth, whosoever preaches. He said, whosoever readeth, let him understand. Well, what in the world is he going to read? Well, first off, we've got to begin to have a clear understanding of what the Bible says. And we cannot read it after theology, tradition. But out here in history, brothers and sisters, there are certain things that do correspond with Bible prophecy. Now, he speaks of the abomination, but that's not an object standing there. It's a condition. Now, brothers and sisters, I want to emphasize this and prove to you. He speaks this for the disciples that were alive right then, because he's just a short time before Calvary. But he's telling them this. Then let them which be in Judea flee into the mountains. He's not talking to you and me. Because you and I don't live in Judea, do we? Let him which is on the housetop not come down. Now, he's not necessarily talking about somebody putting on somebody a new roof. Because most of the homes there were flat topped. And many times women went up on the flat area to take care of certain minor things of the household. That's where Peter was at when he went up to pray. He was not up on a roof line of a 45 degrees. Neither let him which is in the field return back to take his clothes. What's he talking about? He's talking to the Jews then. And woe to them that are with child. He's not talking to this generation. And to them that give suck in those days. He's still not talking to this generation. He's talking to their disciples then. But pray that your flight be not in the winter, neither on the Sabbath day. That's not talking about the rapture. That's talking about them disciples finding a place to flee to. But pray ye that your flight be not in the winter, neither on the Sabbath day. For then shall be great tribulation, such as was not since the beginning of the world, till this time, no, nor ever shall be. Now, brothers and sisters, I'm going to take you back to that time. This is not talking about the coming of Christ in his second event. This is talking about the Romans when they would come and besiege Jerusalem in 69 and 70 AD. And it's an absolute fact, historically, by the Jews. One year when we was taking a group of tourists to Israel, on this particular day, the guide took us out to the temple area. And as we got to a certain spot, he stopped us and he said down to everybody, and he reminded what Jesus had said when he told them, verily, verily, I said to you, there's not one stone here that shall be left on another. He goes into elaborate detail to tell what happened, how that was all fulfilled by the Romans. But when you pick it up from the historical standpoint, what led to that event? Jews of that hour, there were three factions of them. Each faction wanted his own priest. They were so disunited. And many times they was meeting one another, each group, in the temple area, and even killing one another. It brought about an insurrection. Jew against two. Each party wanted to choose his high priest. Josephus records this. As this event became more and more dominant, even the Roman soldiers was only a garrison there in Jerusalem. They seen that they were held helpless. They was afraid to enter into the conflict because every indication the Jews would turn on them. So they said to Nero, you've got to do something. Vespasian was the commander of the eastern garrison troops in Syria. I've got the history with me upstairs. He was commanded to march to Jerusalem. He was told these words, do not tear the city, nor destroy the temple, only put down the insurrection. But the minute that Vespasian and the Roman garrison out of Syria enters into the northern part of the land, every village hearing him on the way, they all begin to get excited. Now's the time for us to unite and grab the Roman yoke. And it says from village to village, as Vespasian marched south, Jews stayed and fought to the last. Every village that Vespasian tried to take peacefully, he had to absolutely bring it to nothing. Many of the Jews just keep fleeing south. They wind up in Jerusalem. By the time then that Vespasian has wrenched the Jerusalem sector, thousands have fled in advance of him. When he gets there, all the Jews began to really rush out the gates, engage the Roman army, and for a few minutes it was fighting like cats and dogs. Finally, Vespasian had to change his command center. What did he do? He absolutely stretches his garrison out like a long arm. He shuts the city in. Let nobody out. And like a long arm sweeping, 5 miles in every direction, every village, every home that he took, every young man was slain. As he made the complete circle, then he goes ahead and says, for 5 miles back, every house, every tree was cut. What did Jesus say in another writing? The day will come when they will cast up a mote against thee. A mote means a mound of dirt, rock, rubbish, anything. And they would encircle the city in on every side. Jesus has said that. And for months, the Romans engaged the Jews. Finally, they run out of food inside. And the time came, as it was said in Deuteronomy, that the day would come when you will eat and roast your own offspring. The history describes it as that. But as these months came and went, Jews began to die by starvation and by fighting. And every night, before the daylight hour came, they threw the dead over the walls to go up into the valley of Kidron. I have to bring all of this in, brothers and sisters, to see this real picture right here. Because Jesus described it. For then shall be great tribulation, such as there never was before unto this day. Now keep in mind, he's not talking about another day. But that's how it was then. Keep in mind, that was the beginning of the abomination that maketh desolate. And Vespasian, when he seen that the Jews would not listen to reasoning, but now the Roman soldiers have become so angry, so furious, they've lost respect for holy place or anything. Their aim was to tear down, cut to pieces, kill anything that got in their way. When they finally gained an entrance through the first wall, that's when Josephus himself surrendered to Vespasian, the Roman general. And it says right there, Josephus in the night had saw a vision. What to do? How to go out and meet Vespasian. And as Josephus comes out, he had been commanding some of the Jewish fighters. But with agreement, he came out and surrendered to Vespasian. And he prophesied, O thou Vespasian, knowest thou not? This day thou shalt be emperor, and thy son shall reign in thy place. It says in the history that Vespasian thought that Josephus was trying to flatter him. Him going to be the emperor. But shortly a Roman courier came. And then the message was to Vespasian, return to Rome, for Nero's dead. And that's why in history, Titus then was commissioned that he took over. And he took over the siege. And brothers and sisters, when they finally did gain entrance through the second wall into the temple compound, the guide that day said, the Roman soldiers were so angry and furious, Titus couldn't stop them. They were so mad at the Jews, they didn't have no respect for nothing. And when they gained into the temple compound, the first thing they did was set the temple on fire. And the fire was so extreme, all the silver and the gold, overlaid in cedar wood, was burnt, and it all melted and fell dripping on the stones. Then when the fire is gone out, and all this gold and silver is now in the cracks and crevices, Jesus has said, verily I said to you, there's not one stone here that shall be left one upon another. The God said, the Roman soldiers with their spears took and tore up every cobblestone to peel out and get the gold. And they didn't stop till they had absolutely excavated the whole area, tore it to pieces, fulfilling the words of Jesus. Now, my brothers and sisters, The guy told us this. But you know what? The record don't show that any Christian that had heard Jesus that day perished. They had all fled across the river into Saudi Arabia. Now that don't mean that from the beginning of the Christian era up to 69 AD, there hadn't been Christians martyred. Don't forget James. He was thrown off of a tower. Stephen was stoned to death. So many other Christians was martyred by the Jews. But then when the hour came that the Roman army marched against Jerusalem, then the Romans, by the anger that the Jews fought, they turned on the Jewish population with such fury. They killed, they slaughtered, and they burnt everything down. And the one wall that's called the Western Wall, for some reason or other, that was the last part of the old temple compound. They even tried to unloose many of these stones to bring it down. But they kept breaking their spears. Now, tradition is this. This wall was built by the poor class of Jews that came back from Babylon. And they could not hire personal workers. And they volunteered and they put this wall together themselves. And God has watched over it. And finally Titus said to the Jews, or to the soldiers, leave it alone. Let's let it stand as a memorial to what a great destruction we've achieved against this place. And they're standing there today. Now then, let's go back and look at them disciples. You know what? That advancing of that Roman army did not overtake them in one night's time. I believe when these people begin to flee the advancement of the Roman army from the north and the east, and these people, refugees, fleeing south into Jerusalem, I believe the disciples was in the area and lived in the environment. They began to look at one another. You remember what Jesus said? And I have to believe, brothers and sisters, that's why when you see the abominations that make a desolate, whosoever readeth. So, brothers and sisters, not only with we will say, with the words that the Savior has left them, and with what Daniel has said about the abomination, but now how the Romans was coming south in such fury. Every Jew that was a disciple, a believer in Christ, they fled across the river. None of them perished. Now my point, brothers and sisters, is this. If he had enough of love in that hour for disciples, will he do the same in the end for disciples? Yes. I have book after book after book. What has went on through the last 100 years? Men setting dates, the coming of the Lord. The rapture will take place, and it hadn't happened. But now the Christian world, they looked upon those individuals as fanatics. And it's made the church world into the place. And they use the no man knows the day or the hour. So what? Leave it alone. But now, brothers and sisters, I have to say this. It's important that you and I know what the book has said. Now then, if there was a knowledge then by the disciples when and where and what, I believe in this book, and again in history, there's things going on that we're as a generation are going to be able to put a picture together. And brothers and sisters, I believe as we get closer to that time, it's going to get plainer and more clear. Now then, I'm going to have something read here In the charismatic world, in the last 30 years, different ones in the charismatic realm have risen up. And they have challenged the idea that the rapture theory is not in the Bible. They've made it very bold that it's absolutely a false revelation. It's out of the pit. And a man by the name of Hal Lindsey has spoken out very bluntly, loudly, and he wrote his books and his literature trying to disprove. Now, if there's anybody out here this morning on the hookup, and you're of his crowd, I want you to listen. We did not go to his school, and neither are we his students. We're students of the Lord Jesus himself. But let's see what Hal Lindsey says about this thing of the secret rapture. It's his own words. Bud, I'm going to read it.
The most troubling how he frankly admits God has a lot of good men who don't agree with his views. If what I'm receiving in the mail is any indication, he has a right to be troubled. A vigorous percentage of Christians around the world insists that Dr. Scofield's rapture theory is biblically weak and originates from a disturbing source. It wasn't known or wasn't discussed until recent times. Just how Dr. Scofield came across his unique rapture idea. It didn't originate with him. It started with a Scottish girl speaking in tongues. Her name was Margaret MacDonald. An eyewitness, Robert Norton, describes the event in his book, The Restoration of Apostles and Prophets. Norton was there when Margaret went into her prophetic trance and announced the Lord would perform a secret rapture before the tribulation. This was the first time, evidently, such an idea came to the ears of men. As far as I can determine, no one ever heard of it before. The girl made notes of her vision, a copy of which fell into the hands of Edward Irving, a famous preacher of London. Irving's new revelation struck fire, spreading all over England. It attracted J.N. Darby of the Plymouth Brethren, who journeyed to England to investigate. He brought the teaching back to the United States, where Dr. Scofield picked it up and built it into his notes, and the rest is history. It shocked me to learn that Margaret was the real source of the Scofield theory. Maybe it doesn't bother you any, but I am a dog Scofield man. I believed everything he had in those notes, accepting them as they were from God. To discover some of them came from the girl's vision was really unsettling. I couldn't rest until I had checked out the story and had seen Norton's words with my own eyes. That sent me to my seminary library, where I began a systematic search of early Christian literature, including the church fathers. Lo and behold, I couldn't find even a hint of a secret rapture. Even the Catholic writers like Alcazar Ribera, Emmanuel Lacunza, Rabbi Ben Ezra, who had considerable to say about the coming Antichrist in 1580, offered no hint to such a rapture.
All right. That's what Hal Lindsey says. by the grace of God, I want to show you. The church world never has understood Matthew 24 at all. They think this whole thing is just something that's been spread out over 2,000 years of time. It introduces, we will say, the first 300 years, and then she goes off into the dark ages of Catholicism. And then it comes right down here to the end and deals with an end-time factor when he's leading his church out, we will say, through the Reformation. The last 100 years has accomplished more to fulfill prophecy than any other era. Now, just about 5 more minutes. Notice now what he goes to. Verse 23. Then if any man shall say unto you, Lo, here is Christ, or there, believe it not. Now, he's not talking about a condition back then. He's talking about a condition now developing here at the end time. For there shall arise false Christs and false prophets, and shall show great signs and wonders, insomuch that if it were possible, they shall deceive the very elect. That was not back then. Neither in the first 300 years. They had their false prophets and everything, and we see what it eventually led to, Roman Catholicism. But this is talked about in the end time and what it develops. They shall deceive the elect. Behold, I have told you before. Wherefore? Now let's notice these words. If they shall say unto you, Behold, he is in the desert, go not forth. Behold, he is in the secret chamber, believe it not. Brothers and sisters, I've never seen a person yet coming out of the charismatic movement that's ever said, come here. Christ is here. We got him. But when we come to this 20th century in the hour that God sent a prophet, in the last 35 and 40 years, it has produced a bunch of mouthpieces, brothers and sisters. We've got him here. He's the Messiah. He's the Lord. He's infallible. He's God. I've seen every one of them. And that charismatic world out there looks at us, brothers and sisters, and they say, that's a big cult. Well, if there's any of you charismatic, listen, I'm not a cultist. I know what God has done in these last days. And you and 40 more like you cannot disprove it. Notice, when they say he's in the desert, go not forth. He's in the secret chamber. Why did Jesus say all these things? He said this for the end-time bride people. Don't believe in such nonsense. Because when I come, I'm not coming on that manner. Or he says, just as the lightning strikes and shines from the east to the west, so shall it be in the coming of the Son of Man. So he's trying to say, bride, when you hear them characters, he's this, he's that, he's here or there. No. Because if you've got the right revelation, you're not looking that way. You're looking up. Because, brothers and sisters, he's not coming secretly to you or for you. He's coming obscure and secretly to that bunch out there. That's why he goes over here and describes the manner. You come, brothers and sisters, two lying in the bed. Now notice, back at the first bunch of disciples, when you see the abomination of desolation, don't come into the house. He's not talking about two lying in the bed, is he? He's talking about people alive that here's of that condition. But now he's talking about two will be lying in the bed. One will be taken to the other left. That's a secret rapture. Two will be working in the field. One will be taken to the other left. That's a secret rapture. Two women could be grinding at the mill. That covers all three aspects of human life and behavior. Industry, agriculture. So we can say this, he is coming when it will be night on some parts of the globe. But others will be in the field, others will be in the place of employment. But the point is this, if you knew who you're looking for, and you know why you're looking for him, brothers and sisters, he's not coming as a secret something other. He's coming, you're going to see him. That's why, brothers and sisters, Paul can say this in 1 Thessalonians chapter 4. This we say unto you by the word of the Lord. That the Lord himself shall descend from heaven with a shout. Well, come on, you denominational charismatic. What is that shout? I've never heard you say yes what the shout is. Don't think he's going to come out there and stand on a cloud and yell great things for you. So we can see this, brothers and sisters. There's a people down here, brothers and sisters, that are getting ready for something, just as Daniel was ready. He had his reason, as we've done read, to prove to you he didn't have to go back. But thanks be to God, God showed him something other, and others benefited from it. And whether I live through to that day or not, I say that some of you are going to live right at that day when that thing's being fulfilled. And he's going to come, brothers and sisters, when the world is not even aware. And those that are ready. Now then, for us the lightning. So verse 27 tears down the idea, I've got to look for him in the secret place. No, sir. Because he's going to be revealed from heaven. Not from somebody's closet. Not from somebody's basement. Like I've heard. And I've got some books. Men today, William Branham, he's going to come back and ride that white horse again and finish his ministry. He's not. You've done singing for the last time. But look at this. I like this part. This just makes me want to jump up and down. So when he's coming like this, well, wheresoever the carcass is, there will the eagles be gathered together. Well, now, what in the world is Jesus talking about? Has he turned to be a cannibal? Why did he say little eagles? Well, brothers and sisters, calm now. It's common. Are we not living in the eagle hour of the fourth seal? What is an eagle? He is a prophetic species. The first was a lion. That's how the Spirit of God projected itself to the disciples in that day. It gave them boldness. Stand in the courts and preach anyhow. But then here comes the beast, the ox. The age of martyrdom when they slaughtered them by the thousands. And then here comes the beast with the head of a man. And all through the Reformation, here God has used men. Intellect. Let me say this. He never used backwood hillbillies. If you look into the ante-Nicene Fathers and see in some of the ancient writings, they'd make some of the professors today look like fools. They wrote letters to kings and magistrates, brothers and sisters, that confounded them. So he used the wisdom of man to combat the intelligence of man. But then, brothers and sisters, when that last beast comes, it's got the face of an eagle. Because God's bringing the end-time generation of people into an age when he's going to deal with them on a prophetic way. So, brothers and sisters, I'm going to have to put this picture. Now we're going to find out in the morning just how we look at this carcass. I want you to know. This carcass is not something that's not some animal laying somewhere in one locality. It had its beginning. But keep in mind, the bride is universal. And so I'm thankful. And I'll tell you this. If the charismatic people had any revelation, they'd be smelling that carcass. Amen. They'd be discerning and finding it out. But they don't have that appetite. So, brothers and sisters, I'm going to leave you with this thought. We're going to pick it up in the morning. The eagles gathered around the carcass. I'm thankful to God for his grace. How great he is.